Welcome, fight fans, once again to Career Profiles with me, your host Sean Bastow, as always joined by Johnston Brown for this latest episode of the series. And today's episode is on one of the best Scottish, if not the best Scottish fighter of all time. It's Ken Buchanan. We're going to be talking about his career inside and outside of the ring. Now, before we do that, I want you guys to go and check us out, of course, on social media. If you don't already, we're at career_profiles on Twitter. And you can go and check out the BTR Boxing Podcast Facebook page, where we have all our latest episodes from the Legendary Night series, this series, and the main BTR Boxing Podcast feed. If you've not already checked us out on any of the podcasting apps out there, then please go and do so. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, or you can find us on Google, or you can even find us on Spreaker, Stitcher, Player FM, Spotify, and TuneIn. Please leave us a rating and leave us a review after you've listened to the episode. It truly helps spread the word about all the podcasts that we run. Without further ado then, guys, this is the next episode of Career Profiles. This is the career profile of Ken Buchanan.
The lightweight champion of the world, Ken Buchanan.
Ken Buchanan, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Scottish fighter to have ever graced the squared circle. And another great pick from the listeners to do for the Career Profiles podcast. Johnston, as always, we're going to go through the life outside and inside of the ring of Ken Buchanan. The highs, the lows, the ecstasy, the agony. One of the greatest Scottish fighters ever, surely.
Yeah, I think that's right. I suppose some would argue maybe Benny Lynch, who's probably in there, a guy that died young in the sort of 40s. I think he fought through the early 1900s. Yeah, I would have to say, looking at the evidence that we've been through today and just watching back at some of his fights, an excellent fighter, one of the greatest British fighters who have graced the ring, and with a remarkable victory as well, which we'll go into.
So as always with Career Profiles podcast, we're going to go through his life, his journey outside of the ring, what led him into the ring, and of course some of the most notable fights of his career, and some of the great stories that we've managed to gather together for this episode. As always, starting from the beginning, Ken Buchanan, as we know, was born on the July 28th, 1945, to his mum Kathy and his dad Tommy, along with younger brother Alan. Now, they lived in a council house in the suburb of Northfield in Edinburgh, which is obviously the capital of Scotland, and it's a stone's throw away from the coastal region of Portobello. Their garden led down to Figate Burn Park, which lies in the east of Edinburgh, nestled neatly between Duddingston and Portobello. And Ken would swing from the tree ropes and jump the burn. He went to Towerbank Primary School, and he spent a lot of time playing football, which often resulted in fights against the other team, for the usual reasons like, did that ball cross the line, or did it go over the bar?
yeah, the old goalpost for jumpers is something that I'm sure many of us Brits can relate to, and especially those long lunch breaks and debates. Whether, as you mentioned, did it cross the line and go over the bar? It still is all fun and games, but Ken seemed to enjoy it. He seemed to get in the middle of most of those fights, which he does actually say a quote about, and he did says it was just kid stuff, pushing and pulling, challenging. I could see that some of the kids were scared, but I got a buzz off of it, an adrenaline rush. Although I never knew that's what it was at the time, I especially seemed to like squaring up to somebody much bigger than myself. So Ken, clearly, not the bully type, but just one of those kids in the playground that loved a little scrap.
Yeah, there was always one. There was always more than one, of course, in most playgrounds, and obviously Ken Buchanan was one of them, of course. Now, in terms of his home life, it wasn't a bad home life that drove him to the boxing gym, nor did he come from a family of boxers. He just enjoyed fighting. But there were two coincidences that drove him to want to become a boxer. In December 1953, when Ken was just 8 years old, his dad saw a poster of a film about the great Joe Louis called The Brown Bomber. They hopped on a bus and went to see the film that day at the cinema, and Ken recalls of that magical moment in his book. So when the curtains went back, I was taken away to this other world, transported. The gyms, the bag, the gloves, and the fights in the ring. The close-ups for the nose and snorting of the lips. Pure heroism of the boxers. That is what I wanted to be, a hero.
It's quite funny how we do most of these career profiles and it always stems from a bad background. But Ken was lucky he didn't have that, and it was just literally inspired by this film, The Brown Bomber. And And as soon as the film finished, Ken decided he wanted to become a boxer. He wanted to be the world champion, just like Joe Louis. And he asked his dad on the way home if he could go to a boxing gym, if he could take up boxing. So that was one thing he'd pestered his dad for quite a while. And there was another coincidence that happened, and it was actually down to his Aunt Agnes, who actually bought Ken and his cousin Robert a pair of boxing gloves. Now, this was mainly because, obviously, like cousins do, spent much of their time, especially boys, fighting. So every weekend, they spent sparring in the back garden, smashing lumps out of each other. Well, Ken was obviously fantasising about becoming a world champion, or he was in that world championship fight. And so that was the coincidence. So he had this film that inspired him, and also his aunt gave him some boxing gloves. And it was just before Christmas, I believe, and it was to actually give him an early present, obviously make her laugh a little bit easier, no doubt. And so it inspired him. But the trouble was his dad hadn't fulfilled his end of the bargain in what felt like, for him, being 8 years old, years. In actual fact, it's probably more like weeks. This is something that he mentioned in his book. And in the end, he plucked up the courage to confront his dad, and he cornered him in the garden near Rosebush, and he said, "Dad, do you remember that Joe Louis film?" And his dad says, "Aye, great, wasn't it?" And then Ken says, "You said you would find me a boxing club." And then his dad says, "Yes, I said I would find you one, and I will." He kept on and on and on. "Is that a promise, Dad? Is that a promise?" And in the end, his dad said, "Aye, it's a promise." That was one thing that Ken said about his dad, is that one quote that he always said was, "Never make a promise and not keep it." So from that point, he felt like he knew his dad was going to fulfil his end of the bargain, and eventually he was going to get in that club.
When I was 8-year-old, I started boxing. I was only 3 stone 2 when I won my first championship. 2 fights in one night, 1953. And I said to my dad when I come out of the ring, I said, "Right, Dad, that's the first title." I said, "I'm going to be world champion." He says, "Well, you stick in, son." He says, "Leave the women alone, leave the drinking alone, leave the smoking alone." I said, "Dad," I'm only 8-year-old. He says, "Well, what I mean, sir, is when you get a bit older, you've got to leave, you can't have all that." I said, "Okay then, Dad, I'll leave all that alone."
So like you say, as soon as Ken got that promise out of his dad, it was only going to be a matter of time. And that matter of time was only a week later, and his dad was true to his word. He took Ken to the Sparta Amateur Boxing Club on MacDonald Road, Edinburgh, and Ken was absolutely over the moon. The name of the club was great to Ken, and he was full of beans, although his heart was almost broken the moment he walked in. Mr. Boiter, who oversaw the juniors, told him that he only accepted kids from 9 years old, but Ken had already confessed he was 8. After seeing the disappointment on Ken's face, he consulted with Tommy, Ken's dad, before returning to Ken and saying, "It's okay, you're 9 years old, what are you?" Ken checked it was alright to go along with the lie before saying, "My name is Ken Buchanan and I'm 9. Of course, for Ken, this was a dream come true, but his dad gave him some words of advice. Bide your time, build up to it slowly, learn the trade before you go in with the tradesman. What an absolute fantastic bit of advice from his dad there.
What a great little quote that is. I won't keep referencing it, but the Titan Legend, the Ken Buchanan biography, where it's come from, brilliant read. I really advise anyone to read it. And what a great little bit of advice from his dad. Bide your time, build up slowly, learn the trade before you go in with a tradesman. I mean, that is the pinnacle of any youngster that wants to become a boxer. I'd say listen to that quote and take that on board, because he's bang on. And within a few weeks, Ken was the club champion after winning his first 2 fights at the lightest weight division, obviously being 8 years old. He was 3.5 stone. That was his 3.5 stone class, which is nothing. And I believe he said Muhammad Ali said he shedded that in a night one time. So it was barely anything. So Ken did go on to say, "I still have the medal. In some ways, it means more than some of the other trophies I have won. It always reminds me of my dad and Mr. Boiter colluding to get me into the Sparta." So Ken was he was inspired by boxing. He loved it, and Ken was beginning to be known as the kid that boxed in school, which obviously, being a bit of a fighter in school, he liked to scrap, put a bit of a target on his back. He was involved in plenty of scraps at Tower Bank Primary.
So Ken was obsessed with boxing, and his dad caught the bug too. He would be there every night at training. Ken would be the first at the gym and the last to leave. And he said, "I lived for boxing. I bought the magazines, the books, studied it like a science. When they would get home, they would continue to study various punches." And he'd say, "I'd practice single punches and some combinations, jab, jab, cross hook, jab, jab. Those were the words that rang in my ears as I went through session after session of combinations. I know it sounds daft, but those words are like poetry to me now. Now, by the time Ken had moved from Towerbank Primary School to the Portobello Secondary School, he was super fit. He was training in the gym 3 times a week, then playing rugby in the morning and football in the afternoon on a Saturday. To say Ken was keen on boxing would be an absolute understatement. He lived and breathed it, even through his education. He was suffering as a result, but he was never worried. His dad was always there, encouraging and helping Ken to improve as much as possible. And his mum, she'd attend every fight as well. And Ken said, "You could hear my mum a mile away. She was one of the most fervent shouters at the shows. She'd yell, 'He's dropping his left, Ken. In over the top, Ken.' People just got used to her. Oh, that's Ken's mum," they'd say.
Yeah, brilliant. I think there was even one time he said when he was in the corner and it was at the break and his mum said to him, "Make sure you chuck the left to the right over the top," and it was all like dead quiet, and then one of the spectators said, "Do you listen to your mummy?" And then everyone sort of started laughing. But she was definitely very keen, and as he said, she was loud and she could be heard, and I know that would have given him a little bit of a spring in every fight he had as an amateur. And once Ken left secondary school, it took him only 3 weeks to find a job, which is obviously a bit different to these days. And he started out as an apprentice carpenter, or as people like to call it, a joiner. And he joined a company on Rose Street in Edinburgh. He basically loved being a joiner by day and boxing at night. And it was a trade that he would actually end up going back to at some points during his career as well, which we will touch on. Now, when fighting at junior level in his amateur days, Ken actually recalled a bout, which was an interesting bout against a guy called Billy Appleby, and the two always produced a belt of a fight, and I believe those in the town sort of quite enjoyed watching them have a little scrap. But his encounter was quite unusual. Now, Appleby was actually disqualified for headbutting Ken in the balls. It was a complete accident, of course, and Appleby actually, what he did was as he threw his shot, he missed it, he's fallen forward, Ken's backed off, and as he's come tumbling down, he's headbutted him straight in the goonie. And he even says, in his own words, "Jesus Christ, you balls," that's what he shouted. And it was from that the referee decided to call it a low blow, and he actually awarded Ken the win, which Ken even said himself was probably a little bit arsed on Billy. Just one guy to mention that he enjoyed having a little scrap with in those amateur days.
What an absolute great story that is about him falling forward. The thing is, you can just literally picture it as you tell the story about him throwing a punch, completely missing, falling forward and headbutting him in the bollocks. What a great story that is. Something that we never knew, and something that I've really enjoyed reading and learning about with Ken Buchanan. Ken Buchanan moved on from junior level to youth before finally getting to the senior level, where he took part in his first international in 1963 against Switzerland in the Kelvin Hall in Glasgow when he was only 17. Ken stopped Hans Schliekman in the second round, but lost to the more experienced Jim McMahon later in the year when fighting in the Scottish ABA Championship. Now, after McMahon decided to turn pro, it left the door open for Ken to be Scotland's first choice in the internationals. It was a European Championships year to be held in Moscow in Russia, and although Ken was underage by 2 years, he was still allowed to travel to the Soviet Union, as it was known at the time, and his first time on an aeroplane as well. Now, he fought the silver medalist Italian from the prior championships, but just lost out on a majority verdict. The next year, in 1964, Ken won the East of Scotland featherweight title, which qualified him to fight in the eliminators for the British title. After winning his quarter-final, he lost in the semis by a decision to Kenny Cooper, but exacted revenge just a couple of months later. With it being an Olympic year, Ken dreamed of heading out to Tokyo to represent Team GB, but politics emerged its ugly head, leaving Ken out in the cold. There should have been a box-off that included Ken Buchanan, Kenny Cooper and Ron Smith. Now in the end, Ron Smith, who was fighting out of the most powerful club in Britain at the time, was selected ahead of the other two, and he would go on to be stopped in the first round. Ken records this particular decision. It was one of those things, like you have in every profession, politics overruling sense. Those people in the know in boxing knew that me or Kenny Cooper would have the better choice, but there was nothing we could do about that.
Oh, it does sound familiar, doesn't it? It's still pretty much like that now. I mean, I suppose maybe not so much with representing Team GB, but especially when you get into the boxing amateur side of things, it's just as corrupt really at times as what it was back then. So yeah, it's interesting. Really, really sad for Ken, because I think it would have been great for him to have obviously gone to Tokyo and represented Great Britain in the Olympics, or at least had the opportunity for a box off, but unfortunately weren't to be. But by the time Ken was 19 years old, he had made significant improvement. I think it inspired him going over to the Soviet Union, and he also won the Eastern District and the Scottish featherweight titles once again after finally winning the British title when he actually defeated Jimmy Isaac at the Royal Albert Hall in London. He beat him on points, and that was in front of Jimmy Isaac's crowd. You know, he was in London. He said he brought a coach down to support him from Portobello, but a lot of, obviously, Jimmy Isaac's crew were there, and he beat him on points, which is a great night for him and a great sense of achievement. And while starting to think about turning over to professional, he actually won twice in Scotland in 1965 when the Scottish boxing team went off to fight a very strong boxing region in Bulgaria at the time. And the Scots actually lost the first competition, which was 9-1, but Ken won his fight. And in the second, they lost 7-2. Ken also winning both fights. Now, the second was actually a disqualification. He does go into quite some detail about this, but after this was due to his opponent, who the Bulgarian guy, who actually was done for biting, which is something we're quite used to now, even with some of the other fights we've witnessed in the pro game. So, but those two victories actually did land him a seat on the plane in 1965 for the European Amateur Boxing Championships, where he picked up a bronze medal.
Thinking about hanging on and going for the Commonwealth, but my dad says to me, son, it's not going to really add a great deal towards your getting a good manager, like, you know. Yeah. You've got one there, Eddie Thomas, down in Wales, and he'll take you. So I just went with Eddie in 65. Well, it wasn't a way, like, you know, it wasn't big money. It was only £50 a fight or something I was getting, you know. But in 1965, £50 was a few bob.
So after a successful amateur career, it was time to make the move into the professional ranks. Now, Ken talks about when he turned over, and he said, I had won the ABA, and now I had to go and fight in the European Championships in East Berlin, where I got the chance to cross the Berlin Wall. There wasn't much more to achieve at the amateur level now, and after some thought, I decided to turn professional. Ken wasn't short of offers. Bobby Neal was an initial favourite, but after he mentioned that he would like to change his style to being less of an outside fighter and that he wanted Ken to move to London, so it was a case of thanks, but no thanks. Now, in the end, Ken chose the former welterweight champion Eddie Thomas as a coach and manager, who at the time was the current manager of the reigning British and European champion featherweight Howard Winston. So it was a great place to learn for Ken, and he was able to gain great experience against the future world champion. And he said, we must have boxed hundreds of rounds together, and I learned an awful lot from him. Now, while picking up that vital experience with Winston, Ken was also given a bizarre piece of advice from Eddie Thomas, who told him to piss on his hands before bed and rub the piss over his eyes. He instructed that this would make your skin go hard and you won't get cut. Ken, of course, did what he was told, but of course it never worked. It was just a load of bollocks.
I'm not too sure whether that advice from Eddie was a wind-up or not. Obviously, you know, both of he did do it. He actually said as well, for a good couple of years, he'd been telling his other stable mates about it, and they were like, what are you talking about, Ken? I think you're off your head, mate. I'm not pissing on your hands. So, yeah, a great little story there between Ken and Eddie. And so when Ken actually turned pro in the summer of 1965, it was a boxing commentator who we all know is Reg Gutteridge, who had been watching him closely, obviously, through the amateurs. And he actually went on to say that he wasn't convinced that he would actually make the grade in the pros game. And he actually said in his own words, I underestimated him very much when he turned pro. I always thought he would have too much of an amateur style, but I underestimated him. He took a punch well and could hit hard. I always thought he was the pretty boxer all the time in the amateurs, but he turned into a really hard pro. So even Red's there, not quite convinced that Ken Buchanan was going to make the grade, or cut the grade in the pros, but boy, he was well wrong.
Ken's first professional fight came against Brian Tonks, who was 1-1 at the National Sporting Club in Piccadilly in London, and he stopped him in 2 rounds. From 1965 through to 1966, Ken had 16 fights, with 16 wins and 6 knockouts. During this period, Ken met Carol at an Edinburgh disco, and by 1967 they'd moved in together on the outskirts of Edinburgh before becoming engaged. Eddie and his dad kept Ken focused on the boxing while maintaining his patience for a domestic title shot. Ken said, "I was a tradesman now, but Eddie and my dad were shaping me into a craftsman." After meeting Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, in August of that year, he finally got a shot at the vacant Scottish lightweight title on January the 23rd, 1967 in Glasgow against John McMillan, who was 6-10-3, who he outpointed over 10 rounds. And by October, he would be fighting an eliminator for Maurice Cullen's British title against the very experienced Spike McCormack, who was 42-38-12, coasting to a 12-round decision. Spike turned up the heat in the final round and threw everything he had at Ken, but he managed to survive the late onslaught, and Ken said, "He was my hardest opponent since I turned professional."
Brian Tonks.
Do you have much of a memory of that actual fight?
Oh, it was a hard wee boy, like, you know what I mean? It was a good wee induction into the boxing game, like, you know. He gave me a good wee fight. It was in the National Sporting Club at Cafe Royal in London, and I stopped him in about 3 rounds or something, 3 or 4 rounds. And that was me started off. But there was a lot of guys my age and my size and what have you, like, that used to be training, and we used to work out together and all the time in the Sparta Amateur Boxing Club in McDonald Road in Edinburgh, and I worked out there, and things just came to a top when I got a chance. I shot at the British title. It was my 22nd, 23rd fight or something like that. And then Maurice Cullen came along. He was a British lightweight champion. I got a shot at him and I beat him. So I stopped him. I think it was the 13th round or the 12th round or something like that. He didn't come out, like, you know.
A really good learning curve for Ken, again against those two fellas in McMillan and McCormack, and 4 months later in February 1968 at the Anglo-American Sporting Club in London. Ken finally got his shot at the British title against Maurice Cullen, who was 45-2. Now, Cullen was put down twice in the 6th, twice in the 9th before Ken closed the show in the 11th with a flurry of shots that basically was unable to get up from him. And he did record a shot. He threw this flurry, and one of them actually nailed him, and he went right down, hit the canvas, and you could see his eyes. He was gone. Ken had become the British lightweight champion in just his 24th fight, which, you know, probably today seems quite a lot. Back then, not so much. And an overwhelmed Ken rejoiced over this fact, and he recalled the joyous moment, and he says, "Ken Buchanan, British champion. I could not believe it. I think I cried, but I can't remember. It was such a powerful moment in my life." And that same year, after becoming British champion, Ken and Carol got married.
So following another 9 victories and 0 defences of his British title, Ken actually felt his career was stalling and became a little bit disillusioned with boxing. He was training hard but fighting guys that were not on his level for as little as £1,500 a year. Obviously this was probably a little bit more back then. You're probably talking double that. The money was poor. He had no big fights and none in the horizon. Plus he was fighting in small venues that didn't excite him. So he actually decided to retire briefly and went back to being a joiner. And he sort of speaks about this moment. "I returned my Lonsdale belt to the British Boxing Board of Control and asked them to cancel my contract with Eddie Thomas. Not boxing for someone as obsessed as Ken Buchanan would have been very, very difficult, but nothing would prepare him for the tragedy of losing his mum Kathy, who at the age of only 51 passed away." Eddie Thomas attended the burial of Ken's mother, and it was at the funeral that Ken decided he would return to the ring, and he had his eyes set on a world lightweight title. He told Eddie, "I want to be the champion, so that when I go and visit my mum's grave, I can show her my world championship belt."
Yeah, it's funny how that happens, isn't it? How you have such a, you know, he's obviously disillusioned with boxing. Didn't feel like he was going anywhere, training hard for petance. And then obviously you have that tragic incident where he loses his mum. And sometimes, you know, in tragedy, as we all know, something good comes from it. And that's what it was. And his mum obviously inspired him. And so once out of his brief retirement, he began the next phase of his career. And he had his eyes obviously set on that world title. But first was the European. Now, once again, Eddie and his dad were teaching him patience like they did as he was sort of working the ladder on the domestic scene. And they another great quote they said to him was, "By the inch, it's a cinch, but by the yard, it is hard. Ken decided he was ready to fight Spaniard Pedro Carrasco, who was actually the reigning European champion. But he actually stepped up to the light welterweight. So the British Boxing Board of Control put Ken forward as a challenger, and it was accepted to fight Miguel Vasquez. And Miguel Vasquez was 38-1-1. His only loss actually came against Carrasco. Now, the fight would be held in Madrid on January 29, 1970. The day of the fight, Ken and his team travelled to Madrid. So on the day, they're jumping on a plane going to Madrid. And Ken said he was super fit. He wasn't too worried about that. Unusual. You'd expect someone to at least go a few days before, if not a week. But later that day, Eddie picked up some weighing scales to check Ken's weight. Now, Ken never had a problem with his weight. Always hit, as he was hitting the scales, he even said to himself, it was a matter of just knowing how much underweight he was, just to work out how much he could eat, because that was how easy he was making weight. But to everyone's disbelief, he was 3 pounds over. Now, he spent most of the evening in the sauna, and he didn't eat a single thing or drink anything. Now, Ken actually recalled, I remember waking up on the morning with a mouth like a badger's arse. And when it came to the weigh-in, he ended up jumping on the scales in front of everyone, obviously a bit overruled, not quite sure what's going to come up. And the scales reads that he was 3 pounds underweight. So the actual scales that Eddie had picked up were wrong. Eddie basically quickly got himself out of that building because he knew that Ken was going to be absolutely fuming with him. And he actually says, I was so mad I wanted to throw Eddie, but at the same time I was relieved. So bit of an unsettling time for Ken. Never, ever have a problem with weight. He didn't have a problem with weight. Had to spend his time in the sauna, not eating, not drinking. Yeah, it weren't good preparation for a big fight for a European title.
And a mouth like a badger's ass as well, has it in his own words.
Brilliant.
So, in the turbulent atmosphere in Spain, where Ken was booed on his way to the ring, during the fight and returning to the dressing room, it went the 15-round distance. Ken and the British reporters all thought he'd actually done enough to win, but as the referee was due to announce his winner, a crowd of Spaniards cornered the referee in the ring, manoeuvred him over to the Velasquez corner before lifting his hand in victory. Ken's promoter, who was Jack Solomons at the time, tried to get the referee to present his scorecard, but he couldn't. In fact, not even the British reporters saw that scorecard. That's absolutely crazy. So nobody knows how that actually went down. It was absolutely crazy that all these people were able to get the referee manoeuvre him over to the Spaniard's corner, and basically it feels like they forced the referee into making that decision. It seems a bit dodgy, seems a bit untoward. Never happened in this day and age, of course. But for Ken Buchanan at that time, it was a setback. But he was always wanting to come back from these setbacks in life, and he was eager to get back in the ring. So a month later, he comes back and he outpoints Leonard Tavares, who was 16-6-4 in Piccadilly, and then Chris Fernandez, 22-4 in Nottingham, before he signed to fight an up-and-coming boxer in Brian Hudson, who was 16-1. Now, Brian Hudson was a very useful, hard-punching Londoner. It would be Ken's first defence of the British title that he'd briefly given back to the British Boxing Board of Control. And it was looking like he'd lose it when he was cut badly over his right eye in the second round. Now, during the break, between the fourth and the fifth round, Eddie was going to go and stop the fight, but Ken convinced him to give it another round. It was in that fifth that Ken landed a big punch square on the chin that knocked Hudson out for the count.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, that, because obviously Ken even says when he went in, he knew this fight was going to be over, and he didn't need the setback of obviously losing the fight again against his up-and-comer. And he said when he went in there, he was looking for the shot, and when you're trying to look for the shot at times, you just don't find it. And he said he just dropped the left hand. He seized the opportunity and landed a big punch, and he really did floor him. And it was a bit touch and go, really, whether he's going to get through it, and he did. He managed to. And a good win, really, for Ken. And 2 months later, Ken receives a call from his promoter, Jack Solomons. Jack Solomons, if anyone doesn't know, it's the same Jack Solomons that got Sugar Ray Robinson over to Britain and fought Randy Turpin as the same Jack Solomons. You have to listen to Sugar Ray's career profile for that. Yeah, Jack Solomons gives him a bell. He calls up Ken. He says, "Hello, you miserable Scots git." He says, "Listen, Ken, how would you like a fight for the World Lightweight title?" Ken responding, "Aye, right. Why not make it 2 world titles?" Thinking he was going to wind up. Thought Eddie and his dad got him to wind him up. And then Jack repeated, "How would you like to fight for the world title, you Scots git?" Ken was still unsure. You're kidding me, Jack. Dennis, me, no. I'm tying up the deal with an agent in New York. Dewey, forget her. So that was it. He was being offered a chance to fight a certain Ishmael Laguna.
They took the fight because they thought it was going to be easier.
Yeah.
I can see this now because I think he took me too easy at the first fight and got the fight of his life. It was in Miami and I was waiting to go out. I said, we're going out in a minute, Kenny. And I heard a big cheer and all this nonsense. I thought, what the hell is that? They made a big noise. I'm not even out there yet. No, Kenny. He says, he's in the ring. I said, he can't be in the ring. I said, I go in the ring first. He said, no. He says, he's went and jumped in the ring. That was Laguna. Aye. He's jumped in the ring in front of me. It was 90 to 100 degrees in heat and 15 rounds, 1 minute rest. You didn't even get a minute rest. When the bell goes, it goes ding, and it takes you about 5 seconds to walk back to your corner. It takes you about 10 seconds to come out your corner. My dad asked this woman if he could borrow her parasol so that he can see the fight. My manager bending over doing my cuts, cleaning them up and that, try to stop them from bleeding, and my dad would be standing there with the parasol over me, over my head, giving me a wee bit shade.
Carlos Alita was Ishmael Laguna's manager. Was looking for a soft touch for Laguna, a stand-up fighter, just the kind that Laguna liked. And Solomon's, being the promoter, put Ken's name forward. Not that Jack thought Ken was going to be a layup, but because, of course, that he'd earned some decent money. But so would Ken. Now, 2 days later, it was confirmed, but the fight would be on Laguna's terms, which meant the fight would start at 2 p.m. in the afternoon when the heat could reach as high as 130 Fahrenheit in an outdoor baseball stadium in San Juan, Puerto Rico on September the 26th, 1970. Ken wasn't bothered. He was more pissed off by the way the Americans thought it was going to be an easy touch, and he said, "A fucking patsy. I'm going to beat this guy, if only for what they've said. Patsy? I'll give them patsy." Ken would earn $10,000, the equivalent of £4,000, and half of it would go in a new car, a new Sovereign, which was worth £2,000. And Ken had ordered it before the fight, telling the salesman that if he didn't win, he won't be back to buy it. But he was that confident that he would win, that he would definitely be back to buy it.
Yeah, a great little story there where he half of his purse as well, $4,000, $2,000 on his car. He knew what he wanted. He said he wanted it. He didn't really care. He wanted to win it. He knew he'd get some more money in his next fight. So 5 years after turning pro, Ken packed up them tartan shorts of his and jetted off to Puerto Rico for the biggest challenge of his life. In his own words, he said, "I never realised what I was actually setting myself up for. The minute you opened the door, it was, oh, Jesus." It was like hitting a wall of heat. If the challenge of the World Lightweight title wasn't hard enough, there was also a life-changing moment unfolding in Ken's life at the same time. His wife, Carol, was ready to give birth to their first son, Mark, while Ken was actually in Puerto Rico. And 9 days before the fight, he received a call from Carol's mum, Anne, and she told him, "You have a beautiful son." And Ken was over the moon. He couldn't wait to get back to his family. But first, he had to overcome Laguna. I believe he went down and had a drink with his dad and Eddie. A drink, he literally said he had a glass of champagne or a mouthful of it, and he left the bottle to them too, and he was overjoyed with it. He was well happy, but obviously it allowed him a little bit of time to forget the fight, but he got straight back on it, laid down in his room, air-conditioned room, and then he was ready for it. And he really just, his mind was set. He wanted to bring that title home to his new family.
So Ishmael Laguna, who was 63-6-1 at the time, was of course an outstanding fighter that was recognised as the #1 lightweight. This would be a huge challenge, even without the scorching heat. Ken's dad recalled their walk to the ring. "We were directed wrongly to the ring. So by the time we got there, Laguna had already picked the corner that was completely in the shade, while Ken's was out in the sun. We borrowed an umbrella from a woman in the crowd at ringside so they could hold it over Ken while he was in the corner." Now, it was 120 degrees on the day of their 15-rounder, and the Panamanian icon was used to the heat, of course. But yet he wanted to get every single advantage possible. To everyone's surprise, the fight was very close, and after the 9th, when a cut opens up on Ken's left eye, the fight is dead even, going in to that 13th round, and Ken decides, "I'm going to change up my style, I'm going to be a bit more aggressive, and I'm going to push myself in these last 3 rounds, which was the best thing he could have ever have done. Now, after the final bell had sounded, a melee ensued in the ring. Everybody gets in the ring, and the result ends up getting delayed.
Judge Tony Castellano, 8-6, 1 even, Buchanan. Jimmy Devlin, 9-6, Buchanan.
When the scorecards are finally read, it's 144 to 143 to Laguna, and 2 judges had it 143, 144, and 144, 145 to Ken Buchanan. So Ken Buchanan becomes the world lightweight champion. His promoter, Jack Solomons, congratulated Ken on his victory by saying, "Well done, Ken, you Scots git." And Ken responded, "Not bad for a fucking patsy."
Really brilliant. I mean, what a moment for him. You know, he's got his new young family at home, and he's just beating a guy as good as Ishmael Laguna in his own backyard. And the fact that he changed up, you know, it was so close. I mean, from what was I've sort of watched, you can just about work it out in the black and white that's on YouTube, and it is very, very even. And he really does change up. At the start, those last 3 rounds, he just goes for broke. He decided. He even said he was exhausted, but yet still felt refreshed. It was a weird feeling. He said it was those last 3 rounds. He just went for it, and his corner advised him. Eddie and his dad were sort of saying, you know, keep doing what you're doing. But he switched it up, and it was enough. And that was those last 3 rounds. And you read the reports, if he didn't do that, he may not have got the win. So that just shows, just, you know, Ken Buchanan obviously becoming the world champion. And, you know, it was 11 months after Ken's mum died, and he finally got that marquee victory. And he spoke very wholeheartedly about the disappointment with his mum, obviously not being there to witness his dreams come true. And in a landmark victory that will always be remembered, one of as Britain's greatest, or Scottish greatest victory, surely ever. Now, in his own words, he said, "She was unable to see me. I wish she had been there, but she'd seen me all right. As my dad says, she was looking down watching me. It was hard, but it helped me a great deal in that fight. And she would say to me in the later rounds, when she could see that I was getting tired, 'Come on, son, throw a few more for your mum.'" So, you know, and when he did say that quote, that was actually on a documentary on YouTube, and it really gets cut up about it. It was really emotional just talking about it all those years on. So, I mean, it just showed me what a magnificent fight and a magnificent achievement for Ken Buchanan.
I felt like when it was near the end of the fight. It wasn't at the beginning or in the middle. No. It was near the end of the fight. I felt that, you know, that I had him at the end of the ropes, pressurising him too much, like, you know. And he was running out of the seam a wee bit, like, you know. And no, it was a hard fight. It was a harder fight than Duran. Duran was his sparring partner for that fight that we had in Madison Square Gardens, 1970.
Absolutely a magnificent achievement, bringing the world title back to Scotland, and in a fight that would be remembered for many, many years, even past this point of where we are in time. Now, it'll always be remembered of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, victory on foreign soil. Now, considering the magnitude of the victory, only 5 people welcomed Ken Buchanan back to Scotland, all of which were his closest family and friends, due to the victory barely being covered in the Scottish newspapers, meaning the general public were completely unaware that they actually had a world champion in their midst. Part of the reason for this would have been down to the British Boxing Board of Control not recognising the WBA title as a legitimate title. They only recognised the WBC, and all the politics would play a part in what Ken would decide to do in his fight next. It was at Madison Square Garden. 3 months later, he fought against the undefeated Italian-Canadian Donato Paduno, 22-0. The lack of exposure was part of the reason why Ken took this fight, plus the added incentive of fighting on the same bill as Muhammad Ali. He won a non-title fight at £147 by unanimous decision, and the Garden fans actually gave him a wonderful applause. The fight is more remembered for what happened before. Now, Muhammad Ali was, of course, the main attraction of the night in his fight against Oscar Bonavena. Now, Angelo Dundee approached Ken Buchanan in the dressing room and actually asked if he could share the dressing room with Ken Buchanan and his team, and Ken said, "Away with you, don't be daft." Angelo Dundee replied, No, Ali hasn't been allocated a room." And Buchanan says, "Okay, you can come in, but I'll tell you what, that lot aren't coming in as well." And at that point he's referring to Ali's massive entourage. So Ken goes and draws a line down the middle of the room with a piece of chalk on the floor, and Ali asks, "Hey man, what are you doing?" And Ken Buchanan says, "I'm drawing this line to show that that's my side and that's your side. Don't cross that line or you'll get that, holding up his fists. So after a few seconds of silence, Muhammad Ali bursts out laughing before crossing the line and getting pushed back by Ken in nothing more than banter. Truly, truly amazing story, that.
Oh, it really is, isn't it? What a brilliant story. And he says Ali was always just, even after he pushed him back, Ali sort of giving it the old, how dare you, you're not the headline act. And it was just all that typical banter with Muhammad Ali. And Ken said it was just an absolute pleasure to be around, and it actually relaxed him going into the fight as well. So what a fantastic. I mean, he comes back to no one in Scotland after being the lightweight champion of the world. And obviously, he wanted to fight in Edinburgh. That's what he wanted. He wanted to fight in Scotland for his first defence. This wasn't a defence, but he got to fight at Madison Square Garden as the co-main event to Muhammad Ali. I mean, that's just incredible. What a fantastic story for this young guy that was coming through. And Ray Clark from the British Boxing Border Control eventually contacted Ken, and he asked if he would fight for the vacant WBC title against a guy called Mando Ramos. And if he won, he would finally be recognised by them as a legitimate world champion, which is incredible. I mean, how much more does this guy need to do? It's crazy. Now, the fight would take place in Los Angeles on February 12th, 1971, but Ramos actually pulled out a week before the fight with a groin strain. In the end, Ruben Navarro, who was 24-2-2, replaced him. And he had been actually training in elimination as well, so he was ready and he was keen. And the funny thing is as well was that it was the WBC that actually they came out, they actually released in the press that they would put their title on the line because they weren't sure, but they thought they'd stick Ruben Navarro in and it would be basically because there's only 2 titles at the time, so this was to be undisputed lightweight champion. And it was a conclusive but hard-fought win for Ken, where he suffered a perforated eardrum, but he did win on points over 15 rounds, and he did become the undisputed lightweight champion of the world. This time, when he arrived home, he was greeted to an absolute hero's welcome by thousands at the airport. It was like a sea of tarted, he said, before parading around town on an open bus.
About time he got that recognition at that point in time, becoming the undisputed lightweight champion of the world. Absolutely amazing achievement. So a couple of days later, Eddie Thomas contacted Ken to discuss the purse of the fight, which totaled $60,000. Instead of celebrating and looking to the future, they end up going into a dispute over what cut Eddie should take. And it didn't end well, as Ken decided to finish with Eddie as soon as his contract ran out in 8 months' time, and he would promote himself with his dad as his lead trainer. So by September 1971, Ken had tried to secure a fight in Edinburgh but failed to negotiate a venue, and in the end he had to settle for the top of the bill at Madison Square Garden in a rematch with Ishmael Laguna. Hey, not bad at all. So he gets that rematch with Ishmael Laguna, and in the third round, Laguna actually catches Ken Buchanan with a good shot that swells up his left eye almost immediately. So to prevent the eye from closing completely, Eddie makes the quick decision to slice the lump under the eye with a razor blade to reduce the swelling. Now, Laguna keeps trying to pound away at the eye, but Ken adjusted and he worked the body and fought aggressively, which kept Laguna on the back foot and unable to attack his eye. The fight goes to 15 rounds again, but this time Ken Buchanan's win was unanimous.
What an incredible story as well. I mean, obviously you're not allowed to do that anymore with the old razor blade, and he did actually say that apparently he was told that it was this actual fight that it was in a Rocky film. He said it was in one of the Rocky films where they did the same thing, and he said they were inspired by this fight. It's a little note there that he mentioned, whether it's true or not, we don't know. But I mean, what a great story! So following his success that year, Ken was actually honoured with an MBE at Buckingham Palace by the Queen Mother. He also scooped the Sports Personality of the Year award, and he actually danced with the Sportswoman of the Year award, who was actually Prince Anne. I think she won a gold in the Olympics, and I think her daughter went to do the same thing in London. And Ken was obviously a huge sporting celebrity and had become a household name in Great Britain. And his contract with Eddie Thomas had ended. And after a failed attempt to sign a contract with the British Boxing Border Control President, it was something to do with the fact that there was a UK contract and an American contract, and the fact that Ken Buchanan didn't feel like he was just wasn't, apart from this great parade he had, he didn't really feel that the British Boxing Border Control were behind him. So he fought plenty of times in America. So unfortunately, their contract was never drawn up, and Eddie actually went to the press as well, I believe, and said some stuff, and that's how it ended. Their relationship basically ended on an unfortunate sour note.
Which happens a lot in boxing, to be fair. Again, even in this day and age, it does happen. You do get a few sour notes and people going to the press over it. So following 2 wins over Elford, who 41-1 at Wembley, and Andreas Stein at 25-2 in Johannesburg, South Africa, Ken was approached by Madison Square Garden, offering him $100,000 to fight Roberto Duran on June the 26th, 1972. The WBC ordered Ken to fight Pedro Carrasco, or they strip him, and the WBA ordered that he fight Duran. Ken's decision, of course, was going to be an easy one, and he said, after tossing and turning for about 2 seconds, I phoned my dad and I told him I was going to take a fight with Duran. After several weeks of training, Ken flew out to New York to finish off his schedule at Grossinger's, and he drafted in Gil Clancy to arrange his sparring partners. Ken Buchanan made his 3rd defence of the WBA lightweight title against Roberto Duran, who was 28-0 at Madison Square Garden. Now, Duran scored a flash knockdown in the 1st round and continued with a little bit of dirty tactics throughout while on the inside, although Ken felt the fight was actually close. The referee and both judges actually had Duran winning by a wide margin going into the 13th. Now, Duran catches Ken with a low blow after the bell ended in round 13. Buchanan, he collapses to the canvas and he's grabbing his bollocks at this point in time. Now, he was able to get up, but he had to be helped to his corner. The referee took a look at Buchanan and he stopped the fight. Ken says, "They helped me to my corner, and then the referee said I couldn't come out. I told him I could keep boxing, but he said, 'You're not coming out.'" Ken was disgusted with the decision. He described the moment he returned to his dressing room. "I took my pants off, and you could see the mark on my protector where it had been hit several times. My balls are turning red, they're swelling up." Although gutted, he reflected on the fight a few days later. "You can't change the past, but I'll tell you something, you can change the future. I had a contract for a return against Duran in 3 months. As we now know, that rematch would never go on to happen."
I'd hit him with a few punches, and it was coming up for the end of the bell, and I was just moving to the side, and the bell went, and then Duran just stepped in and went bang, and that was it. I was in a wee bit of daze, and he just said, "Oh well, no, that's it," he says, "that's it," and walked away. You know, and he walked over to Duran's camp and lifted Duran's hand up. It was ridiculous, but there's nothing I could do about it, and his manager knew that I had a wee bit of a bad night. It wasn't a great night I had. He knew that a return fight between the two of us, I'd win it, no problem, because I'd be watching out for these low punches.
Yes, it's another interesting fight for those that haven't seen Ken Buchanan against Roberto Duran. It is there, it's on YouTube. It's one of the fights you can actually see it in decent coverage. And to be fair, I mean, I've watched the fight. I believe Roberto Duran wins the fight. And I can see Ken Buchanan feels like he's tight. Duran for me is in front. He is a bit dirty. He does go a bit low a few times, not just the once. But, and there is a punch after the bell. And I suppose within the rules, the referee would have been within his right to stop that fight and actually disqualify Duran. But it went the other way, and he obviously decided and opted to say that he couldn't continue and give Duran the victory. Which, I mean, we've done a career profile on Duran, and you can listen to that and find out what Duran was like after the Ken Buchanan win, because he said he'd win it for his idol was Ishmael Laguna. That's who he went out to win it for, and he did go out on the piss. So it doesn't surprise me that although they had in the contract that he was going to fight again in 3 months, I don't think Duran would have been in any condition to have taken that fight. So, yeah, it's a harsh one on Ken. It's funny because, I mean, even Hugh McInerney, he actually says, when on this documentary he was talking about it, he was saying, I can understand why Ken was sort of distraught with it and a bit disgusted. But if he had that rematch and fought Duran, and Duran would have beaten more convincingly, where would his career have gone after that? And that's an interesting thing to think about. End of the day, he's lost 2 fights now, and those 2 fights was obviously a dubious one over in Spain, and then Duran, which again, another dubious loss with the shot below the belt. I mean, have you seen the fight, Sean? It is a close fight, but I think Duran does edge it.
Yeah, it's a very, very close fight, but I think as we covered in our career profiles for Roberto Duran, I think we kind of felt like he was obviously getting the better of him, and you know, there's obviously arguments to say that people felt like Ken Buchanan had kind of quit the fight, and Debates that could be... These are debates that could be had until the cows come home, as they say. So, Ken, of course, wanted that rematch. He continued to chase for the rematch with Duran, and it was promised it would be around Christmas time. And then Duran got injured, so Ken was asked to fight Carlos Ortiz, 61-6-1, on the undercard of Muhammad Ali against Floyd Patterson at the Madison Square Garden again. He accepted in what was his 5th fight at MSG, and he gave Carlos Ortiz an absolute hiding before Ortiz surrendered on his stool in the 6th round.
Yeah, that's another marquee win. Carlos Ortiz, obviously beyond his best at the time, but a great lightweight, and to have done what he did at another fight you can watch, and he does. It's a great performance from Ken Buchanan, and he says himself that he wished it was Duran. As he was bashing him up, he was in his head. He was like, he was Duran. He was beating, kind of thing. But he gets the win, and say after that, Ken was actually matched with, or before he was matched with Jim Watt. Jim Watt, who we all know, is a commentator, but he was also a fighter, a very good one. And he was quite young and green at the time, but Jim Watt was 15-2. But before that fight, he stopped undefeated Chang Kil Lee, who was actually 19-0 in the 2nd round. And once again, it was in his adoptive home, the Garden, the place he actually loved. He really felt that had become his home now. Just interesting that this guy from Port Vila is now saying the Garden's his home. And it was an entertaining fight between Watt and Buchanan when they fought in Glasgow for the British lightweight title. I can't for the life of me think of two Scottish guys fighting for the British lightweight title. I mean, that must have been a big fight at the time, especially over there. And Ken did just get the nod by referee George Smith, who actually scored it 74.5 to 72.5. And basically the experience was the difference in the night. Ken was open and said that. He said if Jim Watt was a little bit, wasn't as green and he had a bit more experience, then it would have been a closer fight. But Ken winning it, he actually went on to win the Lonsdale belt outright in this fight as well.
So Ken won his next 10 fights as he continued to chase that rematch with Duran, or at least get himself into a position for a world title shot. He fought in Miami, New York, Toronto, Copenhagen and Calgary, where he picked up the European lightweight title against Antonio Pudu, 52-2-1, with a knockout in the 6th round. The same guy that had jumped ahead of him for a world title fight the year earlier. In his personal life, Ken and Carol had the second baby, Karen, 2 weeks before he defended his European title against Leonard Tavares, who at this point now was 28-13-5, with a 14-round stoppage in Paris. So Ken's going all over the world at this point. He's fighting everywhere, but his hometown and his home country of Scotland, strangely enough. So Ken was a few months off 30. He had lost 2 fights in 58. He'd put away a few quid. He had business interests growing and a young family to think about, so he contemplated retiring. The problem was, he was still desperate for Duran, or at least a title shot. The British Boxing Board of Control eventually matched Ken with Guts Ishimatsu, who was 28-11-6, the WBC World Champion, and it was to take place in Tokyo in Japan on the 27th of February 1975. Now, as we talked about in Ken Buchanan's career, he had persistent problems with his left eye, and it didn't help when he was thumbed in the same eye by a Japanese sparring partner before the fight. Ken felt that he deserved the nod, but the ref and both judges scored in Guts' favour, and after that fight, Ken said, "I could not see with the left eye from the 6th round. Ishimatsu is a strong fighter, but I thought I was the winner because I landed the cleaner punches." After losing out on the world title defeat, Ken defended his European title once again by defeating Giancarlo Usai in Calgary in Italy, and he was 27-2 at the time. So he loses that fight against Ishimatsu, which was a really difficult fight for him, with obviously the issues with the eye problem, which we've been talking about there. And then he goes on to defend that European title. So even though he loses that title shot, he's still got his European title, so he's still able to defend it. And he's still going to people's backyards as well. And that's one thing that I think we've not overly touched on throughout the episode of Ken Buchanan, is that he fought most of his career outside of his native country, and he fought a lot of guys on their home turf, and that's something for me that I have an absolute newfound respect for going through his career profile.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is the one thing that you don't really see very often. He was a bit of a road warrior. He was not scared to travel. He he was always a confident guy. Some people say he was a bit cocky, a bit hard to, he was a bit of a tough lad and hard to work with, I suppose. That's what many felt. It was him and his dad, and the rest of the world was sort of looking in, and he always made sure he looked after himself and his dad. But he was a cop. I mean, look at the victories. I mean, apart from, he goes over to Japan for one. He obviously wanted the Duran shot. Didn't get that. Goes to Japan, not fighting to do it. He even said in his book, he was sort of saying he had been the guy that actually lost to Laguna. He didn't go in there too confident, but he felt that, he's got a chance. And obviously the persistent eye, he was constantly getting cut in that left eye so many times. He had surgeries on the eye, he had so many stitches in it, that it was obviously playing its toll, and getting thumped in the eye before the fight was helping. And then he went on to defend that title in Italy, and then Ken hammered the Italian with a flurry of blows during the 12th before Ushai's handlers threw in the towel. And the fans, apparently this was a crazy story where they threw in the towel, the referee obviously stops the fight, and literally straight away the fans went absolutely berserk, and they were launching bottles and cans and programs and whatever they could find to throw in the ring. And a bottle actually landed on Tommy's head, cutting it open. And he was literally, because Tommy was covering Ken. So you can imagine the chaos. And during this time, Usai's on the floor still unconscious from being knocked out by Ken. Why they were kicking off, I don't know. And before this, he had actually gone to Calgary before that. And he actually had this crazy welcome. When he won, he was carried out back to his dressing room. So he was sort of saying the difference between the same venue, but it's just two different times. And obviously the Italians at the time weren't happy, and he was actually led out of the ring by the British Army. He even says as he's coming out of his dad, literally claret coming down his head, and he's hitting spectators. He said, as I'm walking out fighting again, just because they're just attacking us. It's crazy. I mean, you don't see this on, we don't get the footage like we do with Hagler when he come over here. Yeah, it sounds like an absolute chaos time for Ken, but he got the win. I mean, he defended his European title.
Following that particular win, Ken actually retired from boxing again and decided to concentrate on his family and his hotel that he had. It was a chain that he had that he'd invested money in, which is something we were touching on earlier with his business interests. Now, his left eye wasn't in great shape at this point either, and he would have to wear glasses for the rest of his life. Life seemed nice until Carol wanted a divorce, which resulted in Ken having to sell his hotel and pay her half. With money becoming a bit scarce, Ken went back to becoming a joiner once again, but the pull of wanting to box again was too much of a temptation to ignore, so he did return to the ring in the summer of 1979, and he was at the age of 34. From that summer to January the 25th, 1982, he fought 9 times and won 4 of them. Once again, as always with these stories, another great fighter comes out of retirement to perform only a fraction of what they once could. And unfortunately, this is the same story again with Ken Buchanan coming out of retirement to try and get a bit of money, but then also in some respects damaging his legacy that he'd created. He did also fall into an abyss in his personal life of alcoholism. But on a positive note, he was actually inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2000.
People say, oh, he lost thousands, he lost. I never lost that at all. A big banking company lost me my money. When people say I went bankrupt and all that, that is the biggest load of crap. Ken Buchanan has never been bankrupt in his life. That was nothing like I never even reached a gutter, I never even got off the pavement. There's times I just get a bit fed up and I just go out and have a swallow. I go to pals, pubs and that, and where I'm not going to be abused. I didn't go stoning about pubs where nobody kens me or they think they ken me or they want to have a go at me or something like that. I just didn't do things like that. I think I feel myself that, I've been to these people and I tried AA and that, but I just... I couldn't take it, you know what I mean? Or they could speak about, and I drink this and I drink that and I do this and I do that. I'm thinking, well, no, I'm not as bad as that, pal. I get drunk and fall about the place, but I have a lap. I didn't get any fights and I didn't go fight with anybody, It has played a big part in my life, the drink, And, well, as I say, well, the drink caused the break up in my second marriage, not the first. But these are things that happen to you, I suppose, But it has been a big problem with me for a while, drink,
A statue was designed for Ken at the back end of 2019 to be put up in Edinburgh, and I think it's safe to say now, as we sort of wrap up about his career, he should be remembered as one of the best boxers to ever come out of Scotland and Britain as a whole. I think many will feel that Benny Lynch has got an argument for that, of course. And then you've got obviously Jim Watt with what he did in his career. Maybe we'll do a career profile on Jim Watt one day as well, being one of Scotland's great himself. Going back to Ken Buchanan, I think it's, for me, looking into his career, looking into his life inside and outside of the ring, what he went on to do was, at the time, unprecedented. To become an undisputed lightweight champion of the world, to beat an absolute legend in Ishmael Laguna, to share the ring with another legend in Roberto Duran, and to win the British title outright and become the European champion and defend that European title. I think you've got to say he achieved more than probably what he initially envisaged he was going to.
Absolutely. I mean, what a magnificent career for Ken Buchanan, and I mean, him being inducted into that International Hall of Fame was massive at the time in 2000, and I believe at the time he was the only British fighter to have done it. I don't think Benny Lynch had been, so this is obviously 2000. Obviously, I think there's been a few more since then. But I mean, the fact that he went over to all those countries, he made Madison Square Garden his home, and they loved him, they adored him. He got standing ovations from him in his performances, and you know, some of those performances you can see on YouTube, they're not all there in full. Some of them are a little bit bad quality, so you do have to rely on sources, on reports, etc. But definitely an absolute brilliant fighter, and you know, again, you look at him as an all-rounder in the British sense. I mean, as British boxers go, he's a guy that, especially in the modern day fighter, he easily makes the top 10, and he's a guy that, I mean, you stick him in the lightweights today, and I'm sure he would have given some of the lightweights today in a very strong division, but he could have easily gone into anyone's backyard and got a result. And a great fighter. And obviously, he had the problem with alcohol. He didn't really touch too much on his book. I mean, I've read articles. We've both read articles. We've both looked at videos on YouTube, etc. And he obviously did have a bit of a problem. Obviously, getting into a bit of an abyss after the divorce of his wife and losing his love, which was boxing, his obsession. And it was difficult for him to get through that. And I mean, he had some dark stories in the book. There was one incident with a guy that, when he was on sleeping pills, and a guy tried to touch him up in his sleep. I mean, God knows what he was doing. Crazy story. I really, you know, the Titan legend that he is. I mean, read his book. It's a great read. It really was. I mean, I found myself hours and hours on end reading this book, and in the end, it was just this awful story of this guy. He literally woke up and he's got his hands down his pants, and he woke up and beat the living shit out of him. Yeah, awful story. You know, he was obviously in a really bad place. I'm not quite sure where he is now. I think he does a lot of tours and stuff. I think he's done one with Marvin Hagler once as well, where he actually came over to Scotland, Hagler. And, you know, I'm sure a few people were on Twitter talking about it. And, you know, I think he does odd bits of talks and stuff. So, you know, he's a very confident lad, and he's got some great stories and some great one-liners and quotes that we've managed to pull together for this career profile. But an absolute British legend for me, and one that I like even more, to be honest with you.
I think one of the other things to go and check out about Ken Buchanan as well is the Ken Buchanan Mbe Foundation that he's got as well at the moment. So obviously we was talking about the statue going up in Edinburgh, but he's also got a secondary purpose of this foundation. It's actually to help sponsor or otherwise support young fighters up and coming in Scotland that are showing promise, or in other sports or athletic events as well. And it's really good that he actually has this foundation set up, and it's run by himself and a few other of his close associates that are helping him develop the youth of Scotland, really, and essentially trying to keep these guys, you know, from getting into trouble and off the streets, and try and give them the opportunities that, you know, some of these guys don't necessarily get. So it's really good that he's got the Ken Buchanan Foundation as well. So if you've not already checked that out, you know, go and check it out. It's on Twitter and it's on social media, Facebook as well. Go and check out his Ken Buchanan Foundation. But ultimately, wrapping up the episode and the career profile of Ken Buchanan, yes, one of the great fighters to come out of Britain, one of, if not the greatest fighter to come out of Scotland, and, you know, inspired so many great Scottish fighters, guys like Alex Arthur and Ricky Burns, and obviously Jim Watt, the young Jim Watt who was coming through at the time, who he fought as well. So many great fighters that have come out of Scotland since Ken Buchanan, who were all inspired by Ken Buchanan. Just goes to show you the magnitude of what he achieved in his career, paved the way for all these young guys to come through and go on and do excellent things in their own career. And it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, to cover an episode for Career Profiles and cover a career of somebody that might have not been well known to a wider audience or a wider boxing audience, and I know that a lot of the podcast listeners that come to our Career Profiles podcast do listen from the United States of America and Australia and various other places across the world, and the hardcore fans will obviously know who Ken Buchanan is, but some of the more casual fans that dip in and out of the sport will maybe not know how good of a career this guy really had and what he achieved. And we hope that we've been able to give you a really good breakdown and some great stories of a career of what is really a truly great man in Ken Buchanan. So, as always, fight fans, thanks for listening. Go and check us out on social media, on Twitter at career_profiles. The Facebook page for all our podcasts is BTR Boxing Podcast. Check out our Legendary Nights series and the main podcast feed too. And if you've not already subscribed to this Career Profiles podcast, then please go on any podcasting app out there, search Career Profiles, and you will find the podcast and all the latest episodes that we've done, and many that are going to come out in the future as well. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Career Profiles with Ken Buchanan.